Welcome to our series on the art and specifically sculpture of Hinduism in India. The sculptural tradition in India is something that is so rich and so substantial that while your textbooks have spoken of Indian sculpture and shown you a few masterpieces, I think that the tradition warrants a video series and a closer look, particularly because we've spent so much time understanding the foundations of what becomes Hinduism in the form of the Vedas. And we have spent a lot of time in this class looking at non visual based Indian culture, artistic, aesthetic culture, religion. You're reading the Bhagavad Gita right now, I hope, and that will give you a wonderful classic Hindu text that may be read by any religion with insight, as the module pages that introduce you to the Bhagavad Gita show. So I am going to provide you with a series on Indian sculpture to give you a bit of a deeper encounter with its form and its iconography. That is, how can we recognize, if you were to go to India as soon as its travel is more normal again, and walk into a temple in the north or the south, I would like you to be able to have a few anchors, visual iconographic anchors to hold on to recognize what you're looking at. And this video series will make that possible. It won't be thorough. There are many gods we're not going to talk about, but we're going to focus on the main ones. And we're going to focus on how we can recognize them and how their form evolved out of the classical period, where we began to see already monumental Buddhist sculpture, and how it flowered and developed this rich, sensuous treatment of form that emphasizes volume and fluidity. It's many scholars have said, you know, when you're looking at Indian art, it's a very particular style, and it's I hope you enjoy these videos. As usual, if I haven't put it in the slide, then you don't need to worry too much about taking detailed notes. As you know, for the exam, I give you a detailed study guide. But on our next exam, I am going to present you with a few works of Indian sculpture that you would not have seen, but will draw so clearly on the points being made in our series and in your textbook. You should be able to do well if you are here and moving through this accelerated class. So without further ado, let's get started. Okay. Okay, I hope I'm sharing. You know what, I'm going to do this twice just to be sure I'm sharing the right screen, so forgive me. I always do this. Okay. Okay, I think we're almost there, my dear friends and students. Here we are at last. Okay, voila. So this is my front page, and we will get to this beautiful dancing celestial being from temple sculpture at the end of this lecture series. It's where we are heading. But let us begin with a quick review of where we've already been together to help you have some signposts to hold on to and to anchor what we're studying in material we've already been exposed to and even tested on. Okay. So the first encounter you had with the subcontinent of India and a three-dimensional sculptural tradition is the Indus Valley civilization here, and I want you to focus and bookmark in your mind these mother goddess or fertility goddess figures, because Hinduism, as your module pages show, as your book states, is syncretic. It means it instead of drawing a boundary around itself and defining itself as to what it is not. It draws all threads near it into its system, its belief system, and integrates it. That's syncretic, and it's very special for that reason, but also very complex in the sense that you can't neatly make a nice list of what is Hindu and what isn't when Hinduism actually forms. So, and we know Hinduism itself is a term that's applied much later to the beliefs and ways of life in India and religion. But the mother goddess, fertility goddess, and fertility cult deities are local practices that continue, no doubt, by the Indus Valley civilization wherever they went. We're not entirely sure where they exactly migrated, but we know that, of course, they crossed with the Indo-Aryans. And the local cults in India, as Vedism developed, had their own deities of nature, and no doubt the mother goddess was among them, as were fertility deities. So we can safely assume that some thread links what we're looking at here to the cult and fertility deities that continue as Vedism develops. And we find them kind of springing up from the earth or from stone as the Indian subcontinent culture begins to make material artistic objects, which has a long period where that is not the case, which is our Vedic period, which we have spent a lot of time discussing. And we know that the Vedic people, the Indo-Aryans who came over the Hindu Kush mountains, were a mobile people, nomadic, and they, whatever objects they had needed to be portable and essential. So we don't see a large sculptural tradition or even architectural aesthetic tradition in terms of art. What we have is this extraordinarily rich tradition of the Vedas, which we have spent a lot of time studying. But we don't have any images of gods during the Vedic period. In my lectures on Vedism and the Vedic gods, I used Hindu sculptures to illustrate my lectures on Vedic gods, because Hindu took Vedic beliefs and integrated it into what we understand Hinduism to be today. But there are no images. So our first really important point to remember is, in studying the development of Hinduism, we're actually studying the development of the articulation and forms of many Vedic gods taking shape. And that is one piece of it, and there are others, of course, which we will find. So moving forward, this is a review now. In our last module, we spent time looking at the Maurya dynasty and the Maurya Empire, which reached its maximum expansion during the great emperor Ashoka. And Ashoka is a very poetic and compelling individual, and not to mention heroic, well, I don't know about heroic, but remarkably powerful and a great warrior and so forth, leader. But my point is, the poetry of Ashoka, and the beauty, at least for me, and probably for many, is the image of the warrior, the great expander, the expansionist, finally conquering the last outpost of the subcontinent of India, here, Kalinga, but at the cost of extraordinary bloodshed and sights that were so horrific and disturbing to him that he vowed to become a figure of nonviolence, practice nonviolence, but not at the level of the austerities of the Jain people, but the middle way of Buddha. And he is the figure who spread material form of Buddha in the form of architecture such as the stupa at Sanchi, which you've studied at length in our last module, as well as these pillars of Ashoka, which are topped typically by lions. Here we have the wheel of Dharma, and often inscriptions of the law. They may include moral points from Buddhism or Jainism. And so that is a beginning of our material form. We know that with regards to Buddha, he is not depicted as a human form at this early period. He is an iconic, which we will talk about shortly, probably in a subsequent session. He appears as symbols, a wheel or his footprints, but not his body himself. So another thread, an early thread that we'll be tracing in the development of sculpture is the shift toward representing gods and giving them form. The Vedas, not at all. They were so intangible, so connected to Brahman, and so linked to the mystic powers of the Rishi that to give them heavy earthly form in some sense is antithetical to the charism or the mystical nature of Vedic practice and the Rishis. And we could do a whole class on that, so let's leave it at that. So Maurya Dynasty, Ashoka. That's our one of our milestones or our flag posts. Now the Kushan Empire followed the dissolution of Maurya Empire, and it's a complex period, and we're not going to focus on the political aspect of it, but we know that by the time the Kushan kings had developed a clearly defined empire here, which is really in present-day Pakistan, moving into Afghanistan and Tajikistan in the north, present-day Tajikistan. This is an area that Alexander the Great had left his fingerprints, his footprints of Greece in the culture, in its made objects, in its arts, architecture, in its language. Greek was spoken. So Alexander the Great is someone you would learn about if you took an ancient Greek and Roman humanities class or art history class. And suffice it to say that what he brought in the conquest of this into present-day Pakistan, he opted not to push into India at that point. He had exhausted himself, but he stopped at the doorway to India, which we could call the Hindu Kush Mountains. A beautiful door it is. And Greek sculptural traditions are, by the time of Alexander the Great, at a great moment of high naturalism or imitation of the human face and form. So the search is for lifelike representation, different than abstract, which or non-objective, which you learned in your art terms, or what is art module. That would be your very first module after the course introductory materials. So this is realistic and naturalistic, but it's also idealizing. It's taking forms that are clearly naturalized human form, but giving them more symmetry, more softness, more smoothness. There's no sign of wrinkles or facial imperfections and so forth. So it's an idealized naturalism. This is Greek sculpture, especially the Hellenistic period of which Alexander was a part. Along with naturalism in the Greek world, we have a great interest in harmony and proportion as a path to beauty. And this is relating to the field of aesthetics in the humanities, which is a branch of philosophy which is concerned with the nature of beauty and art's relationship to it, a topic dear to the Greeks' heart. And if we look at this sculpture, which is one of the earliest depictions of Gautama or Gautama Siddhartha, and here the historical Buddha, this is a very early representation. And what we see here coming out of the Gandhara area, which this is the empire here, and then what we're looking at as Gandhara is right here. So just gorgeous area of India, right about here. I can see, and this sculpture was carved by sculptors who had been versed in the Greek traditions. So we see a beautiful play of diagonal lines that seem to fall naturally, but when you look closely, they're falling in such a way to create a pattern that is in of itself harmonious, like a musical composition of notes where there are repetitions There are counterpoints. We have a diagonal here and then an opposing diagonal here. And then we have many looping V's here, dropping down, repeating. This is all moving from the world of Greek aesthetics. Look at the naturalizing hand. Look at the soft way his thigh kind of presses forward and his weight-bearing leg is hidden under this straight, taut fabric. So we understand the earliest Indian sculpture after the Indus Valley civilization, but is a subcontinent of Indian sculpture. Because we don't want to confuse with the Indian nation today, is one that's deeply influenced by the classical world. And this is an important point to remember. Asia has a long history of being shaped by Western ideas of being exotic, of being other, and of somehow being fundamentally different than quote-unquote Western developments. But our image right here is an essay on why that is not so. And indeed, the classical and the Asian are mingling and forming our earliest representations of Buddha. So I'm going to stop here, and in our next session I will introduce you to the Gupta Empire and the developments of the Gupta sculptural tradition in relation to Buddha, but also specifically we find our first representation of Hindu sculpture, which is what the focus of this series will be about. So I'll see you back soon.